If you were here last week, you may recall that we made up a little story together about a young man with a beard who ended up betting on the Jays game. He bet both for the Jays and against the Jays because he couldn't decide between the two. I thought that worked so well wonderfully last week. I thought we would try something similar again today. This time, though, instead of coming up with a story about a person, I thought we would try an animal. And so the only other caveat is that if you gave a part of the story last week, if you raised your hand and I called on you and you shared something, don't do that again today. I'm looking for fresh blood, or fresh ideas. So we're looking for an animal today for our opening illustration. So once there lived a, hang on, we got to raise your hands. Yes, a horse. Okay, once there lived a horse. What color a horse was this? Jim? A brown horse. Okay. Did it have a white stripe on its nose like some brown horses do? Yes. Yes, okay. All right. A brown horse with a white stripe on its nose. Now, here's a good question. Again, raise your hand. Was this like somebody's horse, a domesticated horse, or was this a wild horse? A wild horse. Okay. All right, a wild horse. And again, raise your hand. Did this horse live on its own, or did it live with other horses? No, nobody in the balcony. No? Yes, Don Scanlon. It lived with other horses. Okay. And was this a young horse, like a foal or a colt, or was this a middle-aged horse, or was this an elderly horse? Wendy. It was the leader of the pack? Yeah, okay, I like that. And how old was the horse? I thought I saw a hand up here a minute ago. No? Nobody wants to put an age on the horse? Yes. 14 years. Is that young or old for a horse? I don't. Middle-aged. Okay, horses live to be 20 or so, don't they? 20. Does anybody actually know about horses? I didn't see anybody raise their hand. Dave, yeah, yes. Do horses live to be about 20, 25? Up to 30, okay, yeah. So if the horse is how old again? 14, yeah, we got a middle-aged horse. All right. Who's the leader of the pack? All right. Lives in the wild, right? Brown horse, white stripe. Okay. So last week we talked about how Elijah was the last prophet of the Lord who was left. All the other prophets had been put to death by the people. The people were worshiping Baal and other false gods. And so the Lord told Elijah to have a showdown on Mount Carmel with the prophets of Baal. And so they decided that each of them would sacrifice a bull on their own altar. And the prophets of Baal, 450 of them, they danced around and they prayed. And when Baal didn't start the fire and consume the sacrifice, they began cutting themselves and trying to get Baal's attention. And this went on all day from morning until supper time, and nothing happened. And then it was Elijah's turn. And he offered a very simple 2-sentence prayer, and the fire of God descended from heaven, and it consumed not only the meat of the bull and the wood, but the stones themselves, and left a big charred circle on the ground. Now, what I didn't share with you last week was that after that happened, and after the crowds who gathered to see this happen, including the young man with a beard who didn't know which side to bet on, once they realized that the Lord was God and not Baal, by this demonstration of power and authority, Elijah told the crowd to kill the 450 false prophets, which they did. Now, the king, Ahab, wasn't quite sure how to take this. Ahab was married to Queen Jezebel. You've probably heard of Jezebel, right? We probably don't know a whole lot about her, but when King Ahab went and told his wife, Queen Jezebel, that Elijah had the 450 prophets of her god, Baal, sacrificed, killed, slaughtered, she was very upset. She worshipped Baal. She was the one who helped kill off all the prophets of the Lord in the land. And so she sent a messenger to Elijah and said, by this time tomorrow, you're going to be dead. And Elijah fled. That seems to me a little odd. that this prophet of God, who had just been in this big showdown with all these false prophets of a foreign god, a non-god, and God had demonstrated his power and his authority so quickly and so powerfully in the fire that came down and consumed the sacrifice. And the crowd was behind him, and they killed off the 450 false prophets for all their evil deeds and bad theology. That after all of that demonstration of God's power and his authority and his work in their lives, Elijah is suddenly now afraid of Queen Jezebel's threat. And so he runs. He runs for his life. He runs into the desert. I can't explain that, but I can relate to it because I know what it's like to experience answers to prayer. I know what it's like to see God moving in people's lives and bringing people together in miraculous ways. And I know what it's like to hear of people's miracles. And yet the very next day, I can have such a lack of faith. I can be so afraid. I can be so worried about something. I can run away from this very God who's just demonstrated his power and authority in my life and in the lives of others. Can anyone else relate to that? Yeah. What is our horse afraid of? With the white stripe down his nose, what is this horse afraid of? People. Yeah, good answer. This horse is afraid of people. Okay, just let that roll around in your mind for a second. I'll do the same thing. Elijah flees into the desert. And we'll look at verse 4. We didn't read this verse this morning. I had Margie start a little later in the passage. Elijah came to a broom tree. Now, I wasn't sure what a broom tree was when I read this a few days ago, so I looked it up. A broom tree, it's not a real tree. It's a big shrub. And it's got lots of little branches that sort of grow in bunches. And so that's why it's called a broom tree, because it looks like it's got all these straw brooms sticking out all over the place. He came to a broom tree, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. Elijah has run for his life because Queen Jezebel has threatened him with death. He's run for his life into the wilderness, comes to this broom tree, sits down, and now he's praying that he might die. Again, I can't explain that. Why someone who ran away to save his life is now wishing he were dead. I have had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors. I'm no better than those who worship Baal and these false gods. Why have I run? What is my purpose? What am I doing in life? You've used me. You've blessed me. You've demonstrated your power and your glory to me. And then I get word that my life is threatened, and I run. I'm no better than my ancestors. Take my life. What difference does it make? And he lies down, and he goes to sleep. Verse 7, is it, Donna? Or 9? 7. 9. Oh, 7. Is there a 7? No, there is no 7. All right. All right, let's just ignore that for a second. Go back to 4. While he is sleeping, an angel of the Lord comes, wakes him up, and said, eat and drink. And the angel has provided water and bread for him, flat bread for him there in the wilderness to sustain him. Elijah eats and drinks, goes back to sleep. The angel comes a second time, wakes him up. Says, eat and drink again. And again, there's water and flatbread for him to eat and to drink. Elijah nourishes and is sustained by this gift from God. He's run from God. He's run from this queen who's threatened his life. He's run away from all faith and all responsibility as the last prophet of God. He's run into the wilderness. And yet in the wilderness, the Lord is still providing for him. The Lord is still strengthening him. The Lord is still blessing him and nurturing him. The Lord is still assuring him, I am the Lord. I am your God. I will meet your needs, even as you run away. So our horse is leader of the pack. The horse is running around through the forest, running around through the tall grass, sees something over on the edge of the field, goes over cautiously. Who is it? Who's there on the opposite side of the field? A person, right? A man, a woman. Hello, are you awake? Who's there? Yes, Frank. The horse whisperer. All right, the horse whisperer is there. The horse has never met the horse whisperer. The horse gets a whiff of the horse whisperer and turns and bolts. Runs. Scared out of, was it a male or female horse? Male? All right. And he runs. Something strange, something different, something scary in this creature that it's never seen before, never smelt before. And so this leader of the pack runs for his life. The Lord provides for Elijah twice, with bread, with water. And Elijah spends 40 days traveling through the wilderness to the mountain of the Lord, Mount Horeb. And he arrives, and this is what the Lord says to him. What are you doing here? No, go back to 9. What are you doing here, Elijah? What are you doing here? What's his answer? I'm running for my life. What are you doing here? I'm running for my life. Our brown horse runs for his life from the horse whisperer. Not going to hurt the horse. The horse doesn't know that. Elijah running for his life, even after that display of power on Mount Carmel, where the Lord burned up the sacrifice, even after the angel came twice and provided food and water as he ran away to save his own life. God meets Elijah on the mountain and says, what are you doing here? I'm running for my life. Elijah is so caught between having faith and trusting the Lord and trying to preserve the life that he has, trying to look out for his basic necessities, which is to stay alive. He's wavering between trust and devotion to the Lord and being self-centered and untrusting and fearful, having such a lack of faith. The Lord says, I'm going to pass by on this mountain. And so Elijah is in the cave on the mountain, and there's a great fire, a great wind. A great wind. Our horse is running, and there's a great wind. And the horse is in the trees, and the trees are blowing, and it's branches and chaos, and the horse doesn't know where he is, what direction he's going, how fast he's going. He just knows that he's lost and afraid. In the great wind, Elijah hides in the cave. Such a great wind that even rocks were breaking, perhaps falling, toppling, and shattering. But the Lord was not in the wind. When the wind died down, there was an earthquake. Our horse is frantic. The earth is shaking. Elijah is going back and forth, like Stu's handshakes. And the earth trembles. But the Lord is not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, there's a great fire. Our horse flees from the fire, lost, confused, afraid for its life. But the Lord is not in the fire. In just the last few weeks, we've lost 3 very dear, precious people in our church family. It might feel like we're all experiencing a great wind, hurricane force winds and earthquakes and fire in our lives, in the life of our church family. Tomorrow, we may experience the eclipse and the sky will go black. But the Lord isn't in any of those. After all the noise, the fear, there is a gentle whisper. And it's in the gentle whisper, after all of the chaos, after all of the fright, when our horse finds himself out of breath, with nothing left to do but to just stand still, lie down, there is a gentle whisper. Horse whisperer, who's caught up to the horse, found the horse in its distress, and without any energy, without anywhere left to run, the horse whisperer is able to speak, to whisper words of grace, comfort, encouragement into that horse's life. When the wind and the earthquake and the fire have died down, the Lord comes to Elijah in a gentle whisper. What are you doing here, Elijah? What are you doing here? The Lord was with Elijah on the mountaintop when things were grand. The Lord was with Elijah when he fled for his life, providing the bread and the water. The Lord was with Elijah when he arrived at the cave. And after all of the chaos and the destruction and the fear, the Lord is still with Elijah in a gentle whisper. What are you doing here? The horse whisperer says to the horse, what are you doing here? This is not where you belong. You belong back with your pack, back with your family, back on the green pastures, back beside still waters. What are you doing here, hiding in a cave? What are you doing here? The beautiful thing is that although we may not always have perfect faith, although we may not always be able to do exactly what the Lord wants us to do, and we may run from our fear, and we may run out of our responsibilities, and we may run away from it all, the Lord is always with us. And he always has a calling for us, a plan and a purpose for our lives, even when we don't recognize it, even when we don't want it. And in a gentle whisper, he comes and he says, what are you doing here? I have so much more, so much better in store for you. So this is what he says to Elijah in the next verse. Go back the way you came. Go back the way you came, through the wilderness. Some people, they get off the rails and they run into the woods and they get so messed up and they mess up all of their relationships, and then the Lord comes to them and they're like, yes, Lord, I get it, I believe, and yes, I'm going to be different now, and thank you so much. And they expect that the Lord is going to, suddenly take them out of the wilderness. Perhaps they run, 20 miles into the woods. They're 20 miles from where they should be, and they expect the Lord to just pick them up and plop them back down where they should be. You can't walk, 40 miles into the woods and expect to get out in 1 mile, right? If you've walked 40 miles, if you've strayed 40 miles, then you've got to walk that path back again. And so if you've messed up some of your relationships or your finances or your priorities or any of those kinds of things, it's not going to instantly change. You've got to take the time, make the effort to undo, to allow the Lord to walk with you back through the wilderness, back through the forest, back mending those bridges and repairing those relationships and your priorities and whatever the case may be. That takes time and effort. Go back the way you came, Elijah, and go to the desert of Damascus. Don't simply go back to where you started, but I'm calling you to something different, something better, something beyond. Go to the desert of Damascus, and when you get there, anoint Hazael king over Aram. You are my prophet. You are my priest. You are my messenger on earth. And I have a plan and a purpose for you. And so the Lord is calling Elijah to go and to anoint this person as king. And there's other people that he wants him to anoint as well. I didn't get into it all this morning. If you're really interested, the names and places didn't mean anything to me, so I figured they wouldn't mean anything to you. But the Lord always has a plan and a purpose that he's calling us into. And so we can rejoice that even when we've run away, even when we've left the pack and we've fled for our lives, the horse whisperer comes with us. The horse whisperer never leaves us. And we may not know he's there, we may not want him there, but he is. And when the wind and the earthquake and the fire have all died down and we've been terrified to death, he comes in a gentle whisper. He says, I love you. I love you so much. I've never left you or forsaken you. But don't stay here. Don't stay in this cave, for I have something better in store for you. And so let us continue to trust the Lord. Let us continue to thank him that we do hear his gentle whisper, that we respond with the mustard seed of faith that he's given us. Let us continue to give him all the praise and the glory. And all the people said, Amen.